Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Wednesday, December 4th, 2019. The new round of impeachment investigation hearings got underway in the House Judiciary Committee on Capitol Hill today. And it was a bit of a snoozer in many respects. Kind of a legal seminar with constitutional law professors. There were 3 selected by Democrats who are in favor of impeachment, and 1 selected by the Republicans, Jonathan Turley, who says he does not support this particular path to impeachment. So the Democratic picks were Noah Feldman from Harvard, Michael Gerhardt, University of North Carolina, and Pamela Karlan from Stanford here in California. And they all made the case in their opening statements and in responding to questions that Trump does deserve to be impeached by the House of Representatives. Here is Feldman, the Harvard professor. Trump has committed impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors by corruptly abusing the office of the presidency. Specifically, he abused his office by corruptly soliciting President Zelensky to announce investigations of his political rivals in order to gain personal advantage, including in the 2020 presidential election. Gerhardt from UNC said that Trump has committed several impeachable offenses by taking actions regarding Ukraine that were worse than Richard Nixon's misconduct during Watergate. If left unchecked, the president will likely continue his pattern of soliciting foreign interference on his behalf in the next election. And he said that Trump's actions are worse than the misconduct of any prior president. Then Pamela Karlan, the Stanford professor, said that Trump's attempt to strong-arm a foreign leader would not be considered politics as usual by historical standards. It is, she said, instead, a cardinal reason why the Constitution contains an impeachment power. A candidate for president should resist foreign interference in our elections, not demand it. If we're to keep faith with the Constitution and our republic, President Trump must be held accountable. Then comes Jonathan Turley. And I find him a fascinating figure, a guy who I've agreed with on many occasions and not so much on others. And Turley, who is a professor at George Washington University, he was a critic of the Bush administration. He was a principled critic of many of the errors of the Obama administration. And he submitted a 53-page opening statement today, making it clear that he is not a supporter of Trump, and he believes that the Ukraine matter warrants investigation. But he argued that the Democratic impeachment case is dangerously slipshod and premature. Quote, I am concerned about lowering impeachment standards to fit a paucity of evidence and an abundance of anger. If the House proceeds solely on the Ukrainian allegations, this impeachment would stand out among modern impeachments as the shortest proceeding with the thinnest evidentiary record and the narrowest grounds ever used to impeach a president. Now here, Jonathan Turley echoes what I have been saying. I don't dispute that Trump abused his power, that his effort to squeeze Zelensky is tawdry, and, in my view, is an impeachable offense. But I think Turley is correct that if that's all the Democrats rely upon, and if they rush this forward without hearing testimony from people like Rudy Giuliani, the former White House counsel Don McGahn, and the mustachioed John Bolton, well, I don't think we will have full evidence about Ukraine, and I think it is a thin track to proceed upon. Now, in his opening statement himself, the chair of Judiciary, Jerry Nadler of New York, hinted that he will be arguing to include articles of impeachment based on obstruction of justice that were outlined in the Mueller investigation report. And at the risk of alienating the people who listen every day to this podcast, you know how I feel that Michael Cohen's plea deal for the cover-up of Stormy Daniels and McDougal, Karen McDougal, I think is her name, that is a crime that is wrapped, packed, and ready to ship. and I hope the Democrats will include that. And I see no reason why they shouldn't include a whole range of articles of impeachment and see how the House votes. At any rate, we saw some early skirmishes as the Republicans, led by Doug Collins and Jim Jordan, used parliamentary maneuvers, dilatory tactics, an effort to call Adam Schiff as a witness, an effort to end the hearing. And all of those, of course, require either a motion to table or some action from the chair. And this is to be expected as this process goes forward. And I think that the reason the Republicans have to disrupt the hearings is because they don't have much to push back on except to say the call was perfect, the president didn't do anything wrong, no quid pro quo. And there was an interesting exchange between Stanford professor Pamela Karlan and Doug Collins of Georgia. Now, Collins is a little bruised because he had hoped that he was going to be appointed to Johnny Isakson's seat for the interim, for the remainder of that term. But he got aced out by some rich Republican who I've never heard of and has never served in public office. So Karlan took exception to Collins suggesting that the hearings weren't about the underlying facts and instead are a political vendetta. And here, Mr. Collins, I would like to say to you, sir, that I read transcripts of every one of the witnesses who appeared in the live hearing, because I would not speak about those things without reviewing the facts. So I'm insulted by the suggestion that as a law professor, I don't care about those facts. But everything I read on those occasions tells me that when Trump invited, even demanded, foreign involvement in our upcoming election, he struck at the very heart of what makes this republic to which we pledge allegiance. So I mentioned about the antics of the Republicans. Shortly after Nadler's opening statement, they started peppering him with motions and demanding that Schiff testify, asking whether federal rules of criminal evidence would be enforced in the hearing to attempt to exclude hearsay. And when the first witness, Harvard Law, Noah Feldman, he started speaking, Republicans asked repeatedly to be recognized for motions. They kept trying to interrupt. When Feldman finished, Republicans moved to postpone the hearing. Democrats objected, and Republicans forced another roll call vote. And according to this account from the Washington Post, through it all, Nadler paused and seemed somewhat uncertain about how to handle it all. His halting stewardship certainly wasn't as smooth as Adam Schiff over at the Intelligence Committee. Now, more on Jonathan Turley. He opened by saying, first, I am not a supporter of President Trump. I voted against him in 2016, and I've previously voted for Presidents Clinton and Obama. Second, I have been highly critical of Trump, his policies and rhetoric in dozens of columns. Third, I have repeatedly criticized his raising of the investigation of the Hunter Biden matter with the Ukrainian president. And Turley said that Trump's July 25th call with Zelensky was anything but perfect. He said that it was his reference to the Bidens was highly inappropriate, and he admitted that the House had a legitimate reason to investigate the Ukraine situation, but that so far, impeachment in his view is not warranted. And he said, I get it. You're mad. The president's mad. My Republican friends are mad. My Democratic friends are mad. My wife is mad. My kids are mad. Even my dog seems mad. And Luna's a golden doodle, and they don't get mad. So we're all mad. Where's that take us? Will a slipshod impeachment make us less mad? Or will it only give an invitation for the madness to follow in every future administration? Now, our loyal listener John Zwiebel has already sent me a link to rawstory.com, where they compiled a bunch of tweets from partisan Democrats who want to pile on to Jonathan Turley and call him a partisan hack. And they are free to do so. But I invite you, as a clear-thinking, independent-minded person, to evaluate what Turley is saying and recognize that the Democrats, claim to have a very strong hand, but in fact, I don't think it is that strong. Now, one of the arguments that Turley made that I don't buy is that this impeachment is occurring because Trump has gone to the courts. Now, he's in the court trying to block release of his tax records. He's in court trying to block the testimony and evidence coming from the State Department, from witnesses like Mike Pompeo, Rudy Giuliani, Mick Mulvaney, and, as I mentioned earlier, the former White House counsel, Don McGahn. So the argument Turley makes is that Trump has gone to court, and if you impeach a president, if you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it's an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You are doing precisely what you're criticizing the president for doing. Now, I find this to be vacuous because Trump is stonewalling. I just listed all the people who he has ordered not to appear before these impeachment hearings. And I think Turley is way off base there when he claims that, they are impeaching him because he went to the courts. I think they're impeaching him too rapidly and not allowing the courts to weigh in and determine what is legitimate here and what is not. So Rudy Giuliani has been jetting around Europe this week. He's been in Budapest and in Kiev. He's got a crew from Trump's new favorite television network. Most of you have probably never heard of OAN. It's One America News. And my in-law, Mike Ackman, is a big fan of One America News. He says it's just totally fair. It doesn't have any bias. But it's very friendly to Trump. And as Fox and Friends appear to disappoint our stable genius more and more every day, Giuliani has turned to this very willing news outlet that's trying to build an audience. I believe they're based in San Diego. So he's got a crew from OAN following him around, and they're interviewing the previous Ukraine prosecutors, Viktor Shokin and Konstantin Kulik, and also Lutsenko. And they're trying to build the case that Ukraine was meddling in the election and helped Hillary in 2016. And while Yasha Levine has shown us, yes, there was action in Ukraine that did end up supporting Hillary Clinton, mostly related to exposing Paul Manafort and the Black Ledger. The theories that Trump is pursuing appear to me to be completely unprovable and likely to be false. So Rudy Giuliani, in my view, is digging himself in deeper and deeper. And it remains to be seen if the investigation of Giuliani by his old shop, the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of Manhattan, or Southern District of New York is what it's really called, will pursue him along with his buddies Lev and Igor. Meanwhile, Trump is flying back from the NATO conference in London. It was a very strange day because last night there was a reception at Buckingham Palace, and a video crew from the Russian network that we call Russia Today, they captured a little chit-chat between Trudeau of Canada, Macron of France, Johnson of Britain, and Mark Rutte of the Netherlands. And Princess Anne was fluttering around there somewhere, too. And parts of the audio are decipherable. Other parts are not. And we hear Justin Trudeau comment about Trump. You just watch his team's jaws drop to the floor. This is followed by tittering. No W in there, tittering among the people who were listening. And Trudeau also said that Trump was late because he took a 40-minute press conference at the top. Now, Trump is extremely sensitive. Bullies are. And he believes that if people are laughing at him, He's got to do something about it. So he canceled a news conference he had scheduled for later today, Wednesday afternoon, and appeared to be actually leaving the conference a little early. But he responded in saying that Justin Trudeau is two-faced. Then he paused, Trump did, and said, well, he's a nice guy. I find him to be a very nice guy. And then he pivoted to criticizing Canada for not paying enough into NATO and suggested that's the reason Trudeau was making fun of him. Now, everybody is denying this. Boris Johnson can't imagine how anyone could interpret the situation this way. Trudeau tried to spin it, saying, yes, he had been talking about Trump in the video, but that he was actually referring to the jaws-dropping comment when Trump announced that the upcoming G7 summit next year will be held at Camp David, rather at the Trump National Doral Golf Resort in Miami. But it's clear. With Trump as our leader, the United States of America is the laughingstock of the world. And I think that NATO members were somewhat surprised that the guy who has stunk up the last two annual meetings came in and ended up pivoting to defend NATO against the criticisms of Emmanuel Macron of France. I think Macron's criticisms are mild compared to mine, and I reference again Medea Benjamin's great piece that I referenced yesterday, and the link to it is in yesterday's podcast, where she took a very critical look at NATO and showed that it has no useful mission in the current era and is likely an anachronism that should be abandoned. And at the New York Times, Mark Landler, one of their White House reporters, has a news analysis piece where he gets to legitimately inject opinion instead of a news story where they just add the opinion and pretend it's fact. At any rate, he captures it well. He says that Trump was subjected to a rare tongue lashing by Macron, who dismissed, and then Trump dismissed, Trump tried to lighten the mood, and then Macron curtly said, let's be serious. And Landler says, for a president who prides himself on being the great disruptor, it was a startling turnabout, one that underscored how Europe's shifting landscape, with an ambitious president in France, a lame duck in Germany, and a breakaway populist in Britain, has scrambled the calculus for Trump. When NATO decided to mark its 70th anniversary with a meeting in London, the goal was to limit the potential for disruption from Trump. As luck would have it, the summit wound up falling in the final 10 days of an election campaign in which Trump has become a recurring issue. That's the British Prime Minister campaign. And he had to go to great lengths to avoid commenting on that. I know that level of self-control is unusual for the Trumper. And one more quote from Landler. The president who once threatened to pull the U.S. out of NATO suddenly emerged as the alliance's defender. The president who once exchanged a death-grip handshake with Macron sat by wordlessly while his much younger counterpart lectured him on the need to fight the Islamic State. The president who championed Brexit and hectored Johnson's predecessor Theresa May about her deal-making skills suddenly had nothing to say about it. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Marvin Rasmussen, Paul Karsh, Abby McMillan, and Margaret Anderson. They each chip in $5 to $20 a month, and you can do it too to help this podcast keep going. And I have had a reduction in my subscriber revenues. As some people move on, some people may disagree with your humble host and decide they don't want to listen anymore. So if you find value in the work I do and in the podcasts I deliver on a daily basis, then do me a favor. There's no quid pro quo here. Just visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page, and in seconds, you can make a choice that is comfortable for you and your budget. Should you want to avoid PayPal, and you may, you can communicate with me at my P.O. Box number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Nancy Pelosi has a phrase that budgets define our values, and it's something that I fully agree with her on. Well, today, Joe Biden and his campaign released their plan about taxes and spending. And oh, is it moderate? And if moderate is what you're looking for, maybe this is the prescription. He wants to raise taxes by $3.2 trillion over 10 years. That is $320 billion a year, which is not a lot. Keep in mind that the Trump tax cuts amounted to $1.6 trillion a year. So Biden is quite moderate. He wants to raise the corporate tax rate back to 28%. It was at 35%. The Trump tax bill cut it to 21%. And, of course, nobody actually pays that rate. The most successful companies pay 0%. Let's see. Biden also wants to raise $800 billion from new taxes on capital gains paid by investors, as well as $400 billion from imposing a new 15% corporate minimum tax. Well, I support that idea. But he is shying away from the bold proposals of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They proposed more than $20 trillion in tax increases over 10 years. Biden rejects the calls for a new wealth tax, and he doesn't want a transaction tax on Wall Street. And that's consistent with his corporate leanings and loyalty over the years. Now, I think that this is defining, and I think that it defines Joe Biden as an incrementalist. And I think that this is a critical issue for my listeners to use to evaluate the candidates. I think Joe Biden is running at the wrong time. I don't think that people will respond to incrementalism. And given the lackluster sentiment that so many voters have for Joe Biden, he doesn't excite them. I don't think that using these very moderate, intentionally pro-corporate plans will get Joe Biden where he needs to go. I do think it is that clear. I want to recommend to you that you follow over to Cal Buzz and read the remarks of Phil Trounstein and Jerry Roberts. They are two grizzled California political reporters. Trounstein worked at the San Jose Mercury News, and Roberts ran the political desk at the San Francisco Chronicle, both for many years. And when Kamala Harris dropped out of the presidential race, they wrote, Harris quit the race Tuesday, not because, as she put it, my campaign simply doesn't have the financial resources to continue. She dropped out because Democratic primary voters had come to see her as an empty pantsuit. As Cal Buzz pointed out early and repeatedly, Harris has positions, not convictions. She tried to present herself as a somewhat progressive, a sort of lefty moderate, but was always triangulating her stance on issues, from school busing to health care, always seeking a position that would work to her advantage. And Cal Buzz wrote a few months ago, after watching her in San Francisco and California for more than a decade, we truly don't know whether she operates from a core of cogent and steadfast political values, or merely from a concatenation of constant calculation, that's alliteration, as to what position most benefits her politically. And by dropping out now, she can take her name off the California primary ballot and avoid an embarrassing fourth or fifth place finish in her home state. And she also could be a potential VP pick, although her attacks on Joe Biden make a pairing with him a little bit unlikely. Now, here's something that I want to get your thoughts about. Julian Castro. He is the Texas man who was, Housing and Urban Development Director for Obama, candidate for president. And Castro says that the media treats candidates of color differently. Quote, to me, and he's referring to Kamala Harris, they held her to a different standard, a double standard, to other campaigns. And I don't know if it impacted her decision to withdraw, but I'm sure it didn't help. He went on to say, I'm disappointed by the treatment her campaign got, especially during the last 7 days, when you had the Washington Post, New York Times, and Politico writing very gossipy-sounding big articles trashing the campaign. Well, I completely disagree. I think Kamala Harris got excessive publicity because she is a woman of color. She's young and attractive, and I think she got a lot more media coverage than she actually deserved. Now, she did have a run-up in the polls. She hit about 15%. She was seen as a contender. But during the last 6 weeks, she has been on a downward spiral. And Castro's criticism of the media for honestly reporting the disarray of her campaign, the cruel way that they laid off people they had just hired and shut down offices that they had asked people to move to, like their headquarters in Baltimore. I think the criticism of Kamala Harris has been on target and not unfair and not biased because of her gender or color. Drop me an email. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Peter@peterbcollins.com. It's happened again. A Florida Republican candidate for Congress, George Buck, put out a fundraising mailer targeting Ilhan Omar, the Muslim congresswoman from Minneapolis. He called her a traitor and said we should hang these traitors where they stand. This kind of ugly, criminal call to action that passes as a political message is really disgusting. And the license for it comes from Donald Trump, who talked about sending Omar back to Somalia and sending other members of the squad back to their homes here in the United States. And Buck, this guy in Florida, is the second Republican to reference the hanging of Omar. A campaign account for a woman named Danielle Stella, a pro-Trump Republican candidate for Congress, was banned from Twitter after suggesting Omar be hanged, along with a depiction of a stick figure hanging from the gallows. They have unleashed Jim Crow-level racism and expanded it beyond African Americans to include Muslim Americans. It's a new low, and we will see more of it. Across the southern border in northern Mexico, in the town of Villa Union, dozens of pickup trucks crowded with armed men and mounted submachine guns roared into town, and it led to a lengthy, hours-long gun battle with state police. The cartel fighters ranged, they say, from 70 to as many as 150 men. 23 people were left dead, and at least 50 homes and buildings were riddled with bullet holes. Authorities found that 20 abandoned vehicles after the gunfire ended. Some had machine gun turrets and welded armoring. The doors were professionally painted with the initials of the drug cartel, and at least 4 of them had .50 caliber mounted machine guns. These are heavily armed drug cartel fighters. And Mexico struggles to respond. In Iran, the government has finally admitted that they did shoot and kill some number of protesters in the recent uprising against the increase in gasoline prices. Now, this is an indirect impact of the U.S. sanctions on Iran. And online videos of demonstrations show security forces firing machine guns and rifles at crowds. Amnesty International estimates that at least 208 people have been killed, but Iranian officials dismiss that figure as sheer lies without providing any facts. I grew up in Ohio, and I am ashamed to report to you what's going on in the legislature there now. And Governor Mike DeWine, who is a disgusting and creepy conservative Republican, is prepared to sign another flatly unconstitutional and totally irrational bill that would ban abortion. And this new one would criminalize abortion. It would create a new category of crime called abortion murder. And it would require doctors to try to reimplant ectopic pregnancies. An ectopic pregnancy is when an egg is fertilized but is not in the uterus. It's most likely in the fallopian tubes of the woman. There is no way to remove that and implant it in the uterus. These are people who, let's say their religious development is much greater than their intellectual development. And they feel that God has really chosen them to end abortion by any means that is available. But it leads to irrational and impossible. I mean, these are science doesn't come even close to enabling what these lawmakers, mostly white men, are trying to demand. And finally, you know how Trump has joined the war on Christmas? You're supposed to say Merry Christmas and not be ashamed about it. No happy holidays for him. Well, the administration gave final approval today to a rule that will take 755,000 people off the federal food stamp program. They're imposing a federal work requirement for people described as able-bodied. And it is just a cruel effort to purge the rolls and punish people who are already struggling. And despite the fact that, there were 75,000 public comments opposing one of the moves, 140,000 public comments opposing this particular rule change. So I'm sure all of those people who get cut off from food subsidies for Christmas this year are going to be really grateful to Trump, and they're going to be just singing Christmas carols and saying Merry Christmas all over the place. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the dang place. You'll find it on YouTube, and I am Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to